Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yvonne Harris. I am a registered nurse and nursing advisor on the practice team here with the SRNA. My role today is to help facilitate on the webinar. Today's webinar is the third of the three-part series on effective mentoring, a paradigm shift, with our guest speaker, Doug Lawrence. Today, Doug will be sharing his expertise on mentoring, and he will help us explore how mentoring can serve as a support structure when caring for persons with PTSD. We will look at PTSD from the perspective of caring for others and for ourselves. And near the end, we will hope to have some time for some questions and answers from the audience. And also near the end, there will be a poll question that we'll be putting up right at the end. It's a one question evaluation that we will ask you to fill out. Now, before we start, I would like to acknowledge that this presentation is being held on Aboriginal land and recognize the strength, resilience, and capacity of the Treaty 4 and Métis people on this land. So before we get started, I do have a couple of notes on how you can engage in this webinar. You will be able to see and hear the presentation, but if you do have any questions, we ask that you go down to the chat section and type in your questions, and we will be reviewing them throughout the webinar and share them with Doug so that we have a chance to answer them. As this webinar is recorded, and it will be posted on the SRNA website and social media for those of you who want to watch it again and for those who are not able to be present with us today. And now that we have housekeeping out of the way, I would like to present Doug. Doug is the founder of Talent C and co-founder of the International Mentor Community. He leads organizations to experience the benefits of how mentoring will encourage workforce culture to flow in harmony with mentors, improve productivity from the employees and mentees, reducing costly employee onboarding, and improving the bottom line, which helps all organizations. He has been instrumental in developing a curriculum for mentoring to help people become more effective mentors. He is an international certified mentor practitioner and an international certified mentor facilitator. He has obtained a certificate of achievement in mentoring and his certificate of competence as a mentor from the International Mentoring Community. His practice of mentoring has resulted in his accumulation of 1,950 plus hours of mentoring in person and virtually, 197 hours of speaking opportunities, and over 672 hours of teaching others how to effectively mentor. He is a volunteer mentor with the Sir Richard Branson Entrepreneur Program in the Caribbean and with the American Corporate Partners in the United States. He works with military personnel in their transition from military to civilian life, and he's currently working with researchers to examine the role of mentoring as a support for those struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. He has experience in law enforcement, and coupled with that and working with people suffering from PTSD has afforded him a unique view of mentoring and PTSD. He is an international speaker and an author about all facets of mentoring. He has published The Gift of Mentoring in 2014, and his second book is set to come out this year in 2020. He works with organizations to establish mentoring programs, influence mentoring as a culture, and provides one-on-one direct mentoring for individuals of all backgrounds and levels globally. He can be contacted directly to discover how mentoring can help, and we will put a link on the site so that you can access that. So welcome, Doug, and I turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And by now you should just about be able to recite that whole story.
I'm getting good.
Yeah, you certainly are. So, and I appreciate that. So, hello everyone, and welcome to part 3 of a 3-part series on effective mentoring. And I'm delighted to be able to deliver this particular webinar because it's one that's very topical to what's going on in the world today, the whole pandemic, and how that has an impact or an influence on a number of people in a different way. But more importantly, for for you folks as registered nurses being in the front lines and dealing with some of that, we need to make sure that you've got the tools that you need in order to, as I call it, to the self-care piece that's really important. So I'm going to share my screen here and get us going here. And hang on here. There we go. All right. So what I'd like to be able to do is I'm going to do a quick review of what we talked about in part 2 and take a look at just some of the material that we had talked about there and kind of go from there. So we talked about a lot of different things, and one of the ones we talked about, what are effective mentors and what's the benefit of mentoring and that. So I want to be able to just touch on briefly on some of these points. So we looked at effective mentors from the aspect of, what's the benefit? So the benefit is that through active listening, engagement, and commitment, they provide mentoring to those of us that reach out and want that. And some of the conversations that we've had over the course of quite a number of years now was looking at mentors with the idea of core values and what some of those could be. So the idea of core values of balance, trust, generosity, passion, courage, and integrity. And when you have all of those and you're open and willing to share those core values, you end up with better outcomes as a result of doing that. And a lot of times I get asked questions about, what are the things that you look for, in a mentor if you're going to be looking for somebody to mentor yourself. And I'm always looking for people who are accessible. So one of the things that is really important to us is making sure that we are accessible. And I know that in today's world, we have lots of alligators nipping at our heels. And we need to also set aside that time to be accessible for working with other people, especially as mentors. We need to make sure that we're approachable and, able to be able to reach out and help individuals on the psychosocial. And if you'll recall, we kind of touched on that last week, which was more of some people call it soft skills. I prefer to call it essential skills. So the psychosocial and the technical needs. And when we can focus on both of those and work towards a close working relationship, the ultimate outcome is a better outcome for everyone. And ideally, the mentor, the effective mentor that we're looking for is somebody who would possess the characteristics of psychosocial and career development piece. So we talked about a bit about that. And then we dived into the deep end of the swimming pool, so to speak, and we talked about effective communication. And for me, this is really what sort of is a defining moment for a lot of us as mentors is, do we understand how to communicate effectively? And that can be what I like to call active listening. So being able to listen, but also being able to hear. And then knowing how to speak responsively in order for that to happen. So last week when we did part 2, we talked about the Socratic method, which takes us back to the era of Socrates and about asking a series of questions to guide people to the answers. We talked about trigger words in a conversation, and I gave you an example of a trigger word where we had a young individual who was dealing with a lot of self-esteem, self-confidence issues. And one of the very first words out of her mouth was very simply, well, I don't think I can do that, which is a trigger word to me that is self-esteem, self-confidence issues. And from there, how do we map? What are the questions we need to ask to guide us or guide the two of us to be able to get to a place where we have a better outcome than what she was experiencing at that particular time. And then we talked about deflections and how deflections can be the person isn't ready to have that conversation, and as a result, they provide a way to, they try to deflect us away from carrying on with that conversation. And they may be suppressing it using anger and aggressiveness as a means to be able to mask their innermost feelings. So when you're dealing with somebody who's extremely up in anger or who is actually very aggressive, take a step back and ask yourself why. Why is that person's behavior the way it is? And what can we do together to perhaps change that behavior? And sometimes it's very simply about listening and hearing and talking our way through those situations. We also talked about crucial conversations and about knowing when the environment that the conversation is taking place has become somewhat toxic and that we need to back out and wait until until it's safe to re-enter the conversation. And sometimes, that can very well be as simple as saying, I think our emotions are running very high right now. And I think what I'd like to suggest is that we get back together again tomorrow at this particular time, and follow through on that to make sure that the conversation that way does take place. We also talked about some other techniques. We talked about storytelling. And as you can probably gather, I love to tell stories. And I have one I'm going to share at the end of this, at the end of part 3, that is very personable from my perspective. But it does help us get a better understanding, a deeper, richer understanding of effective communication and actually of relationship building. We also talked about bias, and bias is something where you have a preconceived notion going into a mentoring conversation of what the outcome is going to be. And a large part of that is influenced by the bias that you may have developed over a period of time. I always have to check my bias at the door, so to speak, just because with the volume of mentoring and that I'm doing, I assume that because we are talking about certain particular things, that the outcome is going to be a certain thing, and that's never the case. You always need to remember that each and every mentoring relationship that you have is a unique mentoring relationship, and that the outcomes may very well be different, and you need to approach each of those unique situations, because we're all unique individuals. You need to approach those unique situations in a context of being open and flexible to be able to deal with that. We also talked about active listening, and we've touched on that already. And then the idea of critical thinking. So that's why we use the Socratic method, is we want to nurture an individual's ability to critically think their way through things, rather than having us actually telling them what they need to do. And so we also talked a bit last time about personal growth mentoring, and I'm going to touch on that again here in just a couple minutes, just to be able to go through some of that information once again. So with that, we'll just move along. So we're going to talk a bit about, towards the tail end, we're going to talk about the aspect of mentoring and mental health, mental well-being, and post-traumatic stress. And we'll get through that. So, but before we get there, and I know you're excited because I'm excited as well about talking about that topic. And what I probably should do is not talk about it anymore, and let's get into this. So I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about effective mentoring, but more important about the hierarchy of mentoring. And where this concept comes from is Jim Collins, who's a well-known author, wrote a book called Good to Great. And in that book, Jim took leadership and categorized it into 5 different levels of leadership. And so what I've done is I've looked at mentoring, because I'm a firm believer that mentoring goes hand in hand with leadership, and leadership also goes hand in hand with mentoring. So one of my favorite analogies is that a good mentor is a good leader is a good mentor. And so henceforth, we developed this hierarchy of mentoring where I actually have created, instead of following Jim Collins, who had 5 levels, I've only created 3. And I have mentor, great mentor, and extraordinary mentor. So now let's take a look at each of those. We'll just spend a couple minutes doing that and go from there. So a mentor is somebody who, certainly from my research and from going through the evolution of my practice of mentoring, a mentor is somebody who is highly capable, provides the answers, wants to do more but is lacking the tools to do so, and will sometimes lose sight of the journey. And so you'll probably hear me saying that quite often. I refer to a mentor and a mentee path together as a journey. And so in this case, the mentor sometimes loses sight of that journey and where it's going and what their role actually is. So you'll find that a lot of people fit this category, and we can help them become that much stronger of a mentor by providing them the tools, which is what's happening with this 3-part webinar series. Is the intent behind that is that you walk away from this deeper, richer experience, and that you have some additional tools in your mentoring toolkit that you're going to be able to use in future mentoring relationships. And so then as you get more experience and you're on your journey of mentoring and wanting to do a lot more things, then you become what I have coined is the term great mentor. So this is someone who you immediately think about when asked who your mentor is. They navigate effectively and efficiently through the mentoring relationship. They understand the mentoring concepts, and they can actually apply those mentoring concepts in a fairly efficient manner. They have had the benefit of some formal training. So some formal training, as in that can be a 2-hour workshop, that can be a half day, that can be a 1-day workshop, that can be more than that. It can even be listening to a few webinars that provide you with some insight into the tools you need in order to be a great mentor. So the formal training. And this is where you start to see the journey of a mentor to move it to one that is a great mentor, because all of a sudden now you start to embrace mentoring as a way of life. And I know for myself personally, I've reached that stage where everything that I do focuses on the concept of mentoring. So I'm constantly evaluating, I'm constantly reflecting on, I'm asking myself those 3 questions we talked about, which is, what went well, what didn't go well, and what will I do differently next time? Because I'm in a constant state of continuous improvement and wanting to enhance the mentoring process, mentoring concepts. So it has become a way of life for me. And then once you get to that stage where you think that you can go no further, then you progress to what we call an extraordinary mentor. And this is that one person that we all seek to become our mentor. That's who we want to have as our mentor, and we'll do anything to make that happen. This is an individual who has, in fact, embraced mentoring as a way of life, and they've had some sort of formal training, and they may have gone down the certification path. And so they may have made an investment in their personal development to become certified as a mentor. And setting that aside, the big thing is that they will have undertaken some sort of formal training. But just as importantly, they are an individual that is continuously learning. So they're continuously reading various publications, going on to various websites and watching different videos and stuff that provide that additional training and knowledge that they need in order to become that extraordinary mentor. They're mentoring a diverse client base. all industries, and which raises the question: is is industry-specific industry-specific knowledge required in order to mentor an individual in a specific industry, or is it a nice to have? And my philosophy is, it's a nice to have industry-specific, but it's not a need to have. And there's a number of reasons why, and part of that is in the relationship building process. If I can ask my mentee a number of questions about the industry that they work in, I then help build a stronger relationship with that individual, because it's perceived that I care about the individual to be asking a number of questions about, the industry they work in, the job that they have, and all of those things. And so it's really important. Me personally, just to give you an example, a little story is that, from Yvonne's introduction, working with the Richard Branson program, I actually am mentoring a couple of young men who are involved in the restaurant business. They have Chilitos restaurant in Kingston, Jamaica, and I've been mentoring them now for over a year and helping them advance their business and expand and grow and all of that thing. But I don't have any restaurant experience. We're looking at wanting to be able to mentor one of the managers in there, and I'm looking at actually bringing my wife on to help work with that particular manager and provide mentoring that way. And she has industry-specific experience. So we're going to do a bit of a blend. The other aspect of the extraordinary mentor is that they are great storytellers, and they're very humble. They tell stories and they weave them, and through all of that process, they are very humble about what it is that they do. And finally, the last point is that an extraordinary mentor creates that extraordinary mentoring experience. And that's really important, in that you want, at that level, you want to be able to give those individuals the experience, the exposure that they want in order for them to be able to learn and grow. Now, we talked a bit about, in my intro, about the idea of touching, hang on here. We want to talk a bit about the personal growth mentoring. And I know this is repetition, but it's also extremely important, is that in order for us to be able to help somebody career development wise, we need to be able to address the personal growth mentoring side. So this means, helping somebody explore their feelings and emotions. This is engaging in dialogues regarding areas of concern or distress. We'll talk a bit about that as well. Asking the critical questions to stimulate thinking and personal growth. And I know that some of this is a review of last week's conversation, but it's also extremely important that we understand this aspect and understand that during the mentoring process, sensitive topics may arise and should be carefully considered. And actually what we'll do is we'll take a look at some of those. And we took a quick look at these, last week as well. So anger management, anxiety and panic, and depression, family and relationship issues, grief and loss, identity challenges, lack of motivation, self-esteem, stress management, financial challenges, health issues. All of those are things that they're sensitive topics, and that you may and you may not have to be able to deal with this aspect of personal growth mentoring. But I want to make sure that you understand this, and that you're comfortable knowing that when this stuff arises, that you may have to make, a decision. Is this something I'm comfortable dealing with, or do I need to refer to someone else, like a full-time professional counselor, or like a psychiatrist or psychologist or somebody like that? So, and I like to bring this up every time I present on effective mentoring, because a lot of people look at this list and go, I'm done. I don't want any part of this. This is too deep, too intense for me. So when you get to that stage, if that's how you start to feel, we probably need to have a conversation. because I think with the work that you folks do, a lot of this is probably stuff that you deal, not probably, it is stuff that you may have to deal with, and you just need to be comfortable with it. And when we get a little bit further along here, we'll talk about the whole aspect of mentoring as it relates to mental well-being and those things. So, all right. So do listen carefully. So when you're dealing with personal growth mentoring, do listen carefully and be non-judgmental. Look for patterns in the mentee's feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Behavior is something that I do some stuff in organizations where it's termination versus mentoring. And one of the things we look to do is to initiate a behavioral change in an employee in an organization. And so I'm always looking at the pattern. So what's the root cause? What's causing the behavior that's taking place? What are the feelings and thoughts that they have that is driving the behavior, whether it be, bad behavior or not, but it's just understanding where that's coming from, asking questions to stimulate critical thinking. So we talked about this quite a bit already, the Socratic method, about using that to stimulate the critical thinking. And then we also talked about last week about co-facilitating or formulating strategies for solving problems. Don't, as a mentor, don't solve the problems for them, but help them, guide them through using the mentoring process, guide them to where they will be able to find the answers. And some of the things that we do not want to do is offer opinions, give direct advice, or tell the mentee what to do in a given situation, or attempt to diagnose the mentee. Leave the diagnosing thing to professionals, especially when it comes to from the aspect of a mentor, and do not continue to mentor if there's issues or challenges that are beyond what you've actually been trained to assist with. So in your folks' cases, your frontline providers, you probably have dealt with a lot of this. Just make sure when you have your mentoring hat on that you're comfortable and that it's not beyond your scope. I know for me personally, because of the volume and the depth of stuff that I deal with, I'm a little bit more comfortable, but I also know where my line in the sand is, where the barriers are, or the line in the sand, so I don't cross over and get into an area where a trained professional is better suited at being able to deal with that. I do still, and I am emphatic about this, I still maintain the relationship. I own that relationship, and I will plug in whoever we need to plug in order for us to begin the healing process and to be able to move forward. And then the last bullet, and I don't think I touched on that a whole lot, but is to do not establish a romantic relationship with the person that you're mentoring. And it can happen. And I've had situations where it could have gone down that path if it were not for the fact that I defined in my expectations of our mentoring relationship, I defined what was in and what was out, and a romantic relationship was definitely out. So food for thought. We also talked a bit about the whole aspect of psychosocial support and career support, and we've kind of touched on that already today. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of more time on that. And we also spoke about group mentoring, and I see that as something for you folks that would work really, really well. And that's where you have someone facilitate a mentoring conversation with a group of individuals. And just to give you an example, and I believe I shared this a week ago, is that every Saturday I have what I call is a mentoring circle. And so what we have is there's typically anywhere from 6 to 8, 10 people show. Actually, we're doing them virtually now, but we get together, whether it be in person or virtually, and we talk about all things mentoring. And it's a great opportunity for individuals to share things that they're doing in the mentoring space, but it's also an opportunity for people who are not mentoring to get some insight into different tools and techniques that they can use in their workplace. And we talked, I mentioned project example of Colorado State. So I have worked, I think 3 times now, I've worked with Colorado State grad students and had them do research initiatives and do it in the context of a consulting engagement. So they had to prepare documentation, so on and so forth. And so for me, that's a good example of group mentoring in that I had 3 groups of 4 and I would guide them to where we needed them to go to help determine the research and stuff that needed and what was the outcome and how would we make sure that I was satisfied with the outcome and so on and so forth. So it was a great exercise, and I hope to be able to work with them sometime in the not too distant future again, because I do have some additional research areas I would like to explore a little bit further. So that's kind of a recap of what we talked about. And I hope that going through that again, it helped you reinforce some of the material that we talked about a week ago. It's really important that you grasp that. So now what I'd like to talk about is mental health and the aspect of mentoring and mental health. And so let me sort of set the stage for you where this all came from. So I was introduced to a chap who was doing research on mental health locally, and I had actually written an article and posted it on my blog site on the idea of mentoring and mental health. And where that had come from was I had started to do quite a bit of research around what is the role or what could be the role of a mentor in the mental health, mental well-being, post-traumatic stress space. And so as a result of me meeting with this individual, it piqued my curiosity to do some more research because we saw that there were some opportunities for us to maybe do some things together. And so as a result of that, what we ended up doing was we obviously did some additional, he continued on with his research process, and I started to do some of my own. And I found out that every single one of us in some way, shape, or form is impacted by post-traumatic stress. And every single one of us has probably been exposed in some way, shape, or form to mental health challenges or mental well-being challenges. And so post-traumatic stress has typically been associated with first responders, military, police officers. And I have a story to share with you. I'm a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, and I'll save my story because it gives you a different perspective. So what is it? We've kind of, it can play havoc on your ability to be able to think your way through things. It can cause a lot of stress. It can cause a lot of anxiety, and that, and it's how your body reacts to various triggers. And so there are certain things that can happen. So I'm working right now with an individual who can't do video mentoring sessions because as soon as you start to record or basically record, it acts as a trigger to something that she experienced in her childhood. And so I need to be mindful and respectful of that and know that, okay, so when it comes to working with that individual, video chats, doing things virtually, not an option. So what I also saw in the work in the research that I'd done was that a lot of students were experiencing stress and anxiety. And you can probably recall a number of news articles where a few students, the stress and anxiety had reached a peak, and it resulted in them taking their own life. And so I asked myself, what could we have done differently that would have changed that potential outcome? And a large part of that is the whole idea of mentoring as it relates to even in the school system is that, there's a great place for a mentor who has had some training in the mental health, mental well-being space, but more importantly, who is just there to listen and hear. And that's one thing that the message that I heard over and over and over again when I talked to people about where I was thinking this could go was, you're long overdue. You should have been doing this a long time ago. And all we ask is for somebody to listen and hear what we're saying. We're experiencing all kinds of pain. We're experiencing all kinds of anxiety, all kinds of stress. And sometimes just being able to talk our way through it with somebody who cares is really what we need. So in the case of the students and what they're going through in the schooling system and all of that, it would be for them to have somebody that they could reach out to and be able to talk their way through a lot of things. And workplaces are no different. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the workplace. There's bullying that's taking place in the workplace, and it's gone untouched for so long, and we need to be able to deal with that. We need to, because that stress is also impacting productivity in the workplace. It's creating a culture of toxicity in the workplace, because the bullying and the stress have to come from someplace, and so we need to be able to deal with that. And that's where I see the role of the mentor, and I'm not embarking on something completely new, but a lot of my research in some of the universities in the UK, they actually have mental health mentors as part of the support structure for that there. I also saw, I believe it was an technology organization in Eastern Canada that actually had something similar in place for mentoring to be done in the workplace. And so the big thing, though, with all of this is that we need to be able to create boundaries. So we need to understand as a mentor, what are we capable of dealing with and what are we not capable of dealing with. So for me, it's where is that line in the sand and what do I need to do? Who do I need to hand off to? And do I have a resource base, a support structure that I can tap into that's going to be able to, I can hand off to a counselor. And I had a couple situations. I had one situation where I ended up having to convince the individual that they needed to seek counseling, and it was marital plus addiction counseling, and to let them know, though, that I was still there, the relationship was still strong, that I was still there from a mentoring relationship perspective to help them walk through the challenges that lie ahead. And so that was how we had established the boundaries, and those were my own boundaries as well, to know that as much as I would have loved to dive in there and try and mentor, that it wasn't really truly the place for me to be able to do that. So some of the things that we need to do is we need to know what the signs and symptoms are of this. Okay, here we go. So some of the symptoms are feeling sad or down, and that's why I said I think that we've all experienced that at some stage, and so we just need to be aware of it. Confused thinking or reduced ability to concentrate, excessive fears or worries, or extreme feeling of guilt, and I've seen that with a couple of I lost some very close friends who were going through post-traumatic stress and were actually experiencing feelings of guilt, fears, worries, all of that. And they actually had withdrawn from friends and activities. And you know how you go when I lost a real good friend who was a fellow police officer. And I kept asking myself when I found out, what could have I done to change that outcome? Was I not listening and hearing what was being said? And really, truly, what is it that I needed to be able to do to maybe change that? And then there's detachment from reality, delusions, paranoia, or hallucinations. And those are all things that, are symptoms that we as mentors need to be mindful of. The inability to deal with daily problems or stress. And I hear this quite a bit, especially now in light of, the pandemic and that. And it's the little things. It's, husband and wife having to work from home and share the home space as their office space. And then we add on top of all of that, so that created its own level of anxiety and stress. Then add on top of it having to homeschool children, it's just gone and magnified that whole area, so that what would normally be something we would take in stride, now we don't have the ability to be able to deal with it. And I'm being asked, on a number of occasions, can we just talk with you, because we want to be able to figure out, maybe there is a solution. Can you help us talk our way through this? And it's people who are having trouble understanding and relating to various situations like the one I just explained, and to people, and those can even be people that, they interact with on a day-to-day basis. It can be a significant other. And then, God forbid, problems with alcohol or drug use, or, problems, sex drive changes, excessive anger, hostility, or violence. So you start to see that change in the behavior. And so then you need to be mindful of what, those are the elements. So then what do we need to do? What are some of the things that we can do to help that person work their way through that and be able to deal with that? And then, the suicidal thinking about, starting to think more on the dark side rather than staying where, as I call it, where there's light. And once we get to a point where people are starting to talk about suicidal thinking, that's where we as mentors, if we haven't recognized it before, the fact that they're starting to think that way, it's a great time and a great place to plug in your professional resources. So your psychologists, your counselors, and all of those great people who can help you and deal with this particular situation. So I want to share a bit of a story with you. And this goes way, way back in my childhood. And so my background is I'm a retired police officer. And I thought at one particular stage that I was super person, superhuman, because all this talk about post-traumatic stress and all of that. And I thought, that's not me. I'm not affected that way. I don't understand what the big deal is all about. And so what I ended up finding out as I learned more and more about this was that I too had experienced post-traumatic stress. I too had turned to alcohol. I too had become aggressive, my behavior in that. And as a result of that, my family life started to suffer. And had I not have turned that around, then the good life that I'm having today with my great wife and my children, my grandchildren, and that would probably not have happened. Let me share a bit of a story. And this one is always difficult for me. But I have this lasting memory of my grandfather, and I'm sitting on his lap, and I'm three years old, and he has me steering the car. And my grandmother's sitting beside us, giving Grandpa the gears because he shouldn't be letting me drive or steer the car. And that memory has stayed with me, vividly stayed with me after all these years. And so my grandfather was in the military and actually had post-traumatic stress, but I don't think that they knew that at the time. And so um, he took his own life while I was still very, very young. And so what that's done for me is a couple things. Number one is that um, the relationship, the message I got from my grandfather was very clear, was that the relationships that you have with your grandchildren is very precious. I have two of them. And you need to make the most of that because you never know what may happen. And all of this that came to me after he had passed. And the other aspect was that relationships in general are extremely important and that you need to foster them, you need to nurture them, you need to make sure that those relationships continue to thrive. And I went through, growing up, I went through stages where I had very little in the form of relationships. And I think that's why mentoring is so important to me today, is that it does allow me to have those relationships that I didn't have before. And so, I encourage you, as you think back on a childhood memory that is very near and dear to you, that you hold on to that and you treasure that as part of all of what we've been talking about. Now, I'm obviously I have mentoring as a practice that I have, um, and it's important to me because I want to work with people who are going through the healing process, and whether they've had health trauma or childhood trauma. I think we as mentors can be there for them and be able to help them work through whatever the trauma is that they're dealing with. And I think, the thing that I'm finding is the more research that I do, the more that I explore, I'm finding that mentoring does have a place, and it is a great place for, for mentoring to be part of the support structure. And it's important that, we understand that and that we put the right tools into practice and in the right place for us. Now, I was truly blessed in that, when I take a look at, oops, hang on here. I got us to the fireside chat before it was time. So for me, there's resilience factors that play into how people are able to deal with post-traumatic stress, mental health, mental well-being. And having a good support system like I did, I had a family, a great wife and children growing up, that I had that support system in place. So I was able to be better positioned to deal with post-traumatic stress. And as you can well imagine, as you folks do as well, have stories you could tell that would more than likely curl the hair of most individuals or cause it all to fall out like mine. But in any event, the idea of maintaining positive relationships, so coming back to the whole idea of relationships, and then, having that good self-image and positive attitude, those are all things that can help us with our resilience, with our ability to be able to deal with things. And the capacity, to be able to manage strong feelings and impulses. And I was actually doing some research this morning, and I came across Dan Pink, who does lots of work on motivation and that. And if you ever get a chance, go to YouTube and search for Dan Pink motivation. And it's one of those videos where he has somebody drawing the pictures while he tells the story. But I found this little quote that Dan Pink had posted, and it is, "Confront the negative, then look for the positive." And so I encourage you, as you go forward with your mentoring journey, to confront the negative and then look for the positive. And so with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions, and we'll kind of blend that into the fireside chat. So Yvonne?
I just had to unmute myself. So first of all, I need to thank you for sharing your expertise and your personal experience with PTSD. I think I think I'm speaking for everyone, this has been very impactful for me personally. It's, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, you think back to some of the experiences that you've had and how they affected you, and one of the questions that I've learned over the years is to always ask why. And I used to say, why is someone behaving this way? And then I've learned to think, why am I reacting to their behavior in a certain way? So that's what I've had to come to get to. But a few of the questions that I had, so and I know when I was reading your bio, your experience with virtual mentoring, and one of the things, because more and more people are working remotely, what are some strategies that both mentors and mentees can embrace or can use to make the experience more positive and more effective?
So you mean virtually,
In a
right?
virtual
Yeah.
environment, yes.
So the big thing that I find is that there's, other than being more acutely aware of body language, and so I I'm an individual that if I'm having a virtual mentoring session and somebody turns their camera off, I'm not as pleased about that, and I may try to convince them to just put your camera on, or you know, if I can figure out a way to get them to do that. But for me, paying attention to what they're doing, like their body language, and how, if I say something, how they react to it. But what it is you have your awareness factor has to be a little bit higher. You got to turn it up a bit so that you're paying a lot more attention, because it's so easy. It's easy to do it in person, but it's easier when you are doing it virtually, that somebody walks by the window or something and you kind of quickly turn to look to see, oh, who was that, instead of staying focused. And actually I um, was listened in on a Zoom conversation. It was actually there was, gosh, what was there, 16 people involved in this Zoom uh, training session. And what the presenter had actually said was, look straight at your camera, look right center fold in your camera, don't glance off anywhere else, and stay focused on that. And that sends the message that you're paying attention. And that's the big thing, is to make sure that your mentee and your mentor, whichever way, is knows that you're paying attention to them, because it's really, really easy to quickly shift your eyesight to the actual picture. So, I see that you're nodding your head in agreement, so where I could possibly still be focused on the camera itself. The big thing is, let's not forget about mentoring because we can't meet face to face, or we probably shouldn't. Let's embrace the virtual aspect, because I'm sorry to say, but it's going to be the way of the future, and I think we're going to start to see more and more of this. I look at it. So I'm working with individuals in Kingston, Jamaica, that we do virtual, and I'm also working with, well, Buck and I just got a thank you note today. We've finished our 1-year commitment with the American corporate partner, and Buck was in Florida. So it can be done. You just need to pay a little bit more attention to what it is that is taking place.
Okay.
That was a long answer.
Nope, that was an excellent answer, and maybe you'll get some virtual jerk chicken.
Yeah.
So I recall in your first 2 webinars, you did emphasize the trust that has to come in a relationship between the mentor and mentee. And if that trust cannot be built or can't be maintained, it's incumbent on the mentor to be prepared to step away from that relationship. So the question I have, so if a mentee, if there was sort of that disconnect in the relationship, if the mentee said, I would like so-and-so to mentor me, how would the mentor respond to that? Like how, if the mentee said, I would like this person to be my mentor, how should a mentor respond to that? Should they help them with that? Or is it best to just sort of step away and let someone else come in and take over that role of assigning a mentor?
So two thoughts. The first is that I would ask the question around, what do you see or what do you feel is the need that this person is going to fulfill that I'm not able to? I would like, and I would turn it into a learning opportunity for myself more than anything else. And then if this is a formal mentoring program that you have and that situation happens, I would have it go back to the mentor program manager and say, this is what's happened. What do you suggest? Ask them for what they think. And it may very well be that the answer is that we assign a new mentor to that individual. But we need to ask the mentee the questions, though, in order to find out what is it that they're looking for, and what was this existing mentor, what did they provide and what didn't they provide? Because we want to make this a learning opportunity for the mentor as well.
Okay. And one more question, if I could.
Okay.
So many times nurses will serve as preceptors, and preceptors to a student or to a new employee, new nurse. And a preceptor role it's a formal role, and there's an evaluative component to it. And oftentimes there's an understanding or a misunderstanding that a preceptor is the same as a mentor. How can we help? If we do have someone who is serving as a preceptor, how can we help them transition into becoming a mentor? Or is it possible for a preceptor to be a mentor to that person, or are they just two very separate roles?
Based on what you've shared, I see them as two separate roles. I see that as potentially a couple different skill sets. So not the same sort of skill sets. The problem that I have is that in the true sense of mentoring, that an individual would, the student, I'll say student nurse for lack of a better choice of words, is in a mentoring context would be sharing some very personal information that may not want to be shared with the preceptor. And it may also, because of the nature of that, it may also cause some challenges for, if the preceptor has to document, which I think they do, they have to do an evaluation. It can create accountability issues, is where you'll end up with the student nurse saying, well, yeah, but that's what you told me, or stuff like that. So I view it somewhat like coaching and mentoring, and the idea of, the mentor, the mentee or the student nurse may share some very personal stuff with the mentor that they may not share with the coach. Same sort of idea. So I think we would want to take a little deeper look at what the roles and expectations of the preceptor are, other than it being a formal role and there's an evaluation. I think there's, how would the preceptor deal with, say, a personal growth challenge where the student nurse, we recognize that they may have some self-esteem issues. How does the preceptor deal with that?
Okay. And I think in today's webinar, when you mentioned bullying, that just sort of rang very true, because we've read so much about, the bullying atmosphere that sometimes happens in the healthcare system and in nursing in itself. So I think your ability to sort of bring to light how mentoring can help positively change the direction that many people may find themselves heading, either being the bullies or the bullied. So I just think that there's so much room to apply and to use mentoring as a way to just strengthen and turn our work environments and our personal environments into a much healthier place to be. So I don't see any more questions in the chat box. So I think I would just, and we have reached 1 o'clock. So I do wish to thank you for taking the time over these last few weeks to share your expertise, to share your profound knowledge of mentoring. And I hope that we have the opportunity to talk with you again. And I do like to say, oh, Mike, or one of the in members has said, thank you for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
So yes, we do thank you. I would like to say before we sign off that I will put the poll question up and would ask all of the attendees to answer that before they leave. And it is up and ready for you to start. So thank you so much, Doug, and very much appreciated. I look forward to looking at the webinars again.
My pleasure.